Hey everyone, it's Jackie from Vegan Yack Attack, and I'm back with a brand new recipe and video for you today. Today we are making Figgy Maple Scones. Nice little breakfast treat or even a snack. Either way, they go great with a cup of tea or coffee. And I'm doing this just in time for the end of fig season. So hopefully you have some figs on hand. I was able to find two kinds at Trader Joe's for this. So run out, go get some figs so you can make this recipe. Now, you may be asking yourself, or you thought about commenting and asking me, Jackie, aren't figs not vegan? And if you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about, what we're talking about are fig wasps, which are a type of wasp where their entire life is dedicated to pollinating figs and then crawling inside to lay their eggs and dying, which is morbid, but so interesting. Mother Nature is really interesting. And here's the thing. So after a few years of, fielding this question, I've looked into a couple reports from universities actually, and I'll link one in the description for quick reference for you. But basically the only types of figs that are majorly known that are pollinated by these wasps are Capri figs and Smyrna figs. I might not be saying that correctly. And I have seen Smyrna figs dried on the market by like Back to Nature and maybe a couple other brands. So those are the two that you want to avoid that are more mainstream in the market that do include the pollination from those wasps. Otherwise, more commercial figs like Black Mission figs and many others, most stuff that you'll find in a regular grocery store is vegan because it does not need to be pollinated by these fig wasps. So again, like I said, I'll put a link to that information for quick access for either maybe you're getting that question as well. I know I've gotten it from some non-vegans that are curious and or maybe trying to be a little accusatory, but luckily you have me to provide you with the science. That all being said, let's get to these scones. Really quickly, the ingredients, we have some all-purpose flour, which I've left out because I want to show you the proper way to measure flour in case you don't know. We have some full-fat coconut milk. Vegan half and half may work here as well. You basically want a fatty, rich milk for this. You could even make a really thick cashew milk at home. That's what I've done in the past for several scone recipes, but I find that full-fat coconut milk is really easy. Then we have some ground flaxseed, maple syrup, of course. We have vanilla extract, some evaporated cane sugar, vegan organic sugar. And then we have baking powder, some cinnamon, nutmeg, and salt. And then we have some vegan butter. We're gonna need a 1/4 cup, so half of this stick. And then we have some fresh figs. And if you don't have fresh figs, I think a really good alternative would be to use dried figs, but just reconstitute them in some boiling hot water for a few minutes, maybe like 10-15 minutes. So they're a little soft. Make sure you drain them so they're not too wet. They don't affect the batter too much, but I still think that those would be really good in this recipe if you don't have fresh figs on hand. First things first, we're going to mix some of our wet ingredients together. So here, I'm going to add actually these ground flaxseed into the coconut milk so that they can absorb some of the liquid first. And then we have our vanilla extract, and a couple teaspoons of that. And then we have our maple syrup, just to give it a little bit more like fall vibes of a flavor. You can still use agave nectar if that's what you have available to you, or just use a 1/3 cup of sugar instead of a 1/4 cup like I'm using here. Okay, so we can whisk that together. I would like that ramekin. Oh, the oven's ready. So whisk that together and then we'll set it aside. Okay, leave that over here. Little tap tap. Ooh, got some on me. Okay, now let's measure some flour. And this may seem simple when in fact, here we go. Now I've organized myself. When in fact, I was measuring flour wrong for the longest time. And it wasn't until I worked with Fran Costigan on her cookbook trailer video that I was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to measure flour. And this is actually more important for those of us using, I guess, the English system. If you're using metric and you're measuring by weight, which is why I have a scale here, I love to do that because I don't have to wash as many dishes. This is not going to be as pertinent because you just go by weight. And here we just want to make sure that the flour is fluffy enough that we're not getting too much flour, basically. So what you're going to do, we have our all-purpose unbleached flour here. So I'm going to scoop it and kind of like loosen it up a little, and then pour it in here. And I would normally do this over here. I just want you to be able to see it. So you just lightly pour it into the cup, then scrape off the top, and then add your cup of flour in. So it is simple, but before I would just scoop this in. Oh, okay. So now we have I can tell noticeably that this is a much heavier cup of flour. So you don't want to do that. And if your flour has settled and you scoop into it, then you have a really dense cup of flour. So this is how you should be measuring your flour for baking recipes. Okay, and then we just need a 1/4 cup more, plus a little bit for the counter when we roll these out, but that'll be in a few minutes. So go ahead, put this over here for us. And now we can add in our sugar. And we have our baking powder for leavening. Then we have, like I said, our ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, and salt. And the salt is also going to add to the buttery flavor. I like this recipe because it's not too sweet, and I'll give you some options to kind of choose your own adventure scone-wise. So you just whisk that together until everything is mixed. And now we're gonna multi-use this whisk. This is actually one of my favorite things. So like I said, we need some cold butter. You don't want room temperature butter for this, but we only need a 1/4 cup, which is 2 ounces of vegan butter. So I'm going to cut this in half. There we go. And then cut it into a couple pieces so that it's a little easier to, flour explosion. A little easier to cut into the pastry, right? So you can use a pastry cutter. I have one of those as well. In this case, I like using the bottom of the whisk to cut the butter into the dough. So we're just going to go like that. You're gonna have to do this a little bit because we want this to basically be like pea-size pieces of vegan butter in here. And what that does is, similarly to biscuits, is creates these little fat pockets within the dough that then make it nice and flaky when you bake it, because the fat melts and it gets the flour nice and crispy in certain spots. Very, very good. So as you see, this also works, and you can use a fork if you want, but I feel like most people have a whisk. So this is, in my opinion, much faster than using a fork. And you can just do this. You don't have to like press the fork up against, the sides of the bowl or anything. I just mash it all around. Okay, I have a couple bigger pieces in there. You can also, like, this whisk doesn't have many wires. I have another one that has more wires that is a little bit better for this because it cuts at a faster rate. Like I said, it's really not a big deal. You just watch me do it all. Okay, we have that all mixed. Now we'll be adding our wet mixture. There we go. Okay. And just kind of like fold that together because it's not going to end up being a super wet batter, obviously, because you're going to, you know, cut it later on to little scone shapes or whatever you want, really. We just want to mix this until there are no dry pockets. You don't really need to mix it much more than that. That seems a little wet, but we're going to let it sit for 5 minutes after we mix in these figs. There we go. Once we let it set and then roll it in flour afterward before baking them, they'll be the perfect consistency. Okay. Just trying to get these evenly distributed. I quartered these figs, but some of them were kind of large. So if you have larger figs on hand, I would suggest just like chopping them up so that the pieces aren't too large. They're a little easier to mix into the dough. Okay. Raw dough, but really it is tasty. All right, I'm going to put this in the fridge since it's a little warm here to set for 5-ish minutes. If you are somewhere where it's cooler, you can just leave it covered in your kitchen. I'm just worried about the butter melting in here if I leave it in my kitchen as is. So we'll be right back. Okay, now that it's been 5 minutes, this is still pretty jiggly. So I'm going to flour this surface a little gratuitously. Here we go. Ooh, yeah, nice and nice and flour right here. Okay, and there we go. Get the rest of this in here. And that refrigeration time, in this case, also helped the coconut milk to like cool and kind of solidify a little bit. So anyways, we're going to knead this, but not really. We're really just like folding it over a few times. That's why you want a well-floured surface. And this way we get more of those buttery layers in here. There we go. You don't want it to get stuck. And then pretty much like as soon as it's not really sticking to anything, like this, kind of pat it. That's pretty much all you need. You don't really need it to be overly folded. I'm gonna do just one more time though, because we got some figs I want to keep in here. Okay, a little bit more flour. There we go. Okay. And now I'm just going to pat it down to roughly like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, because we want these to be some tall scones. We want some height on these bad boys. And then here I have a parchment paper lined baking sheet. You can also use a silicone mat like a Silpat. If you use one of those, I find that sometimes the baking time is just like a minute or two longer because it is really thick. But that's an option. So I have the parchment paper here. And now I'm just going to cut with a very sharp knife. You can also use a pastry cutter or like board scraper. Either way, we're gonna do 8 triangle scones. You can also do like a biscuit cutter with this if you want them to be round. It's really a personal preference, but you want them to all be the same size so that they have the same baking time, basically. So do the half cut first, then quarter on each side, and then 1/8. Okay, we have this nice triangle shape here. I'm just gonna spread those out on the baking sheet. Ooh. Okay, I like to switch directions a little bit. feel like these figs are much more ripe than the last ones that I used, which is nice. These will be a little sweeter, but black figs are not as sweet as green figs. And actually, I'm going to link to one of my favorite illustrations. My friend Stacy Michelson puts together these really great like ingredient infographics. So she has one on figs, and I feel that it's super informative. So I'll go ahead and link that in the description as well. Now I'm going to actually move this out of the way a bit. Oh, this is how I keep the cutting board in place, by the way. Just so you can see this a little bit better, I now have a little bit more of that full fat coconut milk. I'm going to brush the tops of these scones. This gives them a nice golden hue when they're baking up. It's not like super shiny like an egg wash, it's just like a nice toastiness that it gets. These are all done and ready for the oven. Now here is where you can start choosing your own adventure. If you like a scone that's not super sweet, in this case, while the coconut milk is on here, get some turbinado sugar or really coarse sugar and sprinkle it over the top to get that nice sugary crust. Or if you really like it kind of in between and you like to put like butter on it after, just leave it like this. I actually ate a bunch like this last week and they were really good. But what we're going to do is bake them like this and then make a maple glaze for the top. Well, not like your donut maple glaze. It's like a maple hinted glaze, basically. But let's bake these first. We're gonna put them in for about 25 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want them to be nice and golden. If you want them a little bit more darker than that, you can. It will just probably dry them a little bit more because this is a pretty hot oven. So I'll see you in 25 minutes. I ended up going a couple minutes longer than 25, I think like 28 minutes, because I wanted them just a tad more golden brown. So let's see. Ooh! Look at those. Yes. And usually I'd let these cool down for probably like 20 minutes before glazing. I'm just gonna let them cool down for a couple minutes because honestly I got shit to do today and I wanna get this ready for you and all done. So I'm going to just put these on the cooling rack outside of the baking sheet really quick. Woo! Actually, I'm gonna need some tongs for this. This way they cool a little faster. Okay, I'll get rid of this over here. Now we're going to put together the maple hinted scented glaze. I have some powdered sugar here. And before you make a glaze, or even like just a regular buttercream or anything, you wanna sift the powdered sugar because if you get clumps and stuff, it's just such a bummer. Like, I feel like they never beat out in a mixer, like a stand mixer, or if you're using a hand mixer. So this is a really easy way. And even if you're sifting like all dry ingredients, this is another great way to do that very quickly instead of trying to like hit it and get in the bowl, whatever. You see that only took me a few seconds there. So we have our powdered sugar. Here I have some full fat coconut milk. I'm really trying to get the most out of that can. There's still a little bit left in there, so you can always use that in some coffee or something, or maybe a smoothie. And then there's a little maple syrup in the bottom. So I'm going to stir this together since it's separated a bit. And add 2 tablespoons first. And it doesn't seem like much, but powdered sugar, as soon as it gets wet, it just like dissolves into a puddle. So this one's getting a little clumpy. We'll add in a little bit more, another tablespoon. There we go. Ooh. And because that's not gonna drizzle, is it? I'll add in the last bit. Let's see what that is turning into from all of that powdered sugar. I've got this very nice grip because this stuff is kind of like taffy. Okay, there we go. And it'll depend on your powdered sugar. I actually made this myself because I had run out before. So yours may need a little bit more liquid. Just, you know, don't make it too wet because it won't solidify on the scones. But I feel like this is actually perfect because I'll be able to just do a little drizzle with the whisk. This is like kind of like my favorite thing to do. I don't really use like a spoon. I feel like it just is not very consistent. So like that, I think that could be nice, right? Set that aside and let the scones cool for just a couple more minutes. So these are still a little bit warm, but I have now transferred the cooling rack back into a cool baking pan just so that we don't make a huge mess. You can do this when icing or frosting or decorating anything just to contain your mess a little bit. So now I'm going to take this glaze, ooh, and just, oh yeah, that's nice. Just crack myself up. Okay. And because they're still warm, this is gonna melt a little bit, which actually could be really nice. Won't be like excessively glazed. And you don't wanna make the glaze too far ahead of time or else it'll start drying out pretty quickly. Just shaking that to get a little bit more glaze off of there. And as I said before, if glaze is gonna make this a little too sweet for you, just use a coarse sugar on top of that coconut milk before baking. And then it'll crisp up really nicely, kind of like a Danish or a pastry. I guess this is technically a pastry, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. So you can do that, or just leave sugar and the glaze completely off. All right. Oh, shit. Oopsies. That one globbed a little bit. My bad. Okay. You see how I'm just laughing at the progression here. Very nice and neat to, I'm not sure what's happening. Okay. Here we go. Here's our scones. Wow, so sexy. As sexy as a scone can be, I'm sure. Now, I think these are cool enough for me to take a little nibble of. So I have some coffee off to the side. I'll enjoy it with this in a bit, but I want to take a bite of, here, this one's ugly. I'll take a bite of this one first. You see this nice glaze on here. The little fig chunks right there. Are we ready? We're ready. Actually, I see a fig. I'm gonna just take the most awkward bite out of this thing. As said before, the maple flavor is not like super significant. If you want to add like maple extract to it, absolutely go for it. I think that would be still very delicious on here. The fig and maple combination. But this, and you see it's nice and fluffy inside. Hopefully you can see some of that. Get some of that fresh fig situation. I'm sure you can hear that the outside is nice and crunchy, while the inside is nice and fluffy, like the perfect biscuit or scone. And then when these cool down more, they'll be a little bit more dry on the inside, but still, they'll be just perfect scones, basically. So I'm going to put this down, wash my hands, wash my face, probably. Enjoy a cup of coffee. Relish that I have 7 more of these to eat. So if you enjoyed this video and this recipe, the full recipe will be in the link in my description on my blog. Very easy to find. And give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'll see you on the next video.